750,000 people. 750,000 human beings. All dead in just 1 hour. Not from a plague, not from a natural disaster, but from a calculated, methodical slaughter so complete that when it was over, even the cats and dogs lay dead in the streets. The pyramids of skulls were so high, they could be seen from miles away. 3 separate pyramids. One for men, one for women, one for children. The year is 1221, and what's about to happen in the city of Nishapur will go down as one of the most brutal acts of revenge in human history. But here's the insane part. This wasn't random violence. This was personal. Very, very personal. You see, 1 year earlier, a single arrow had changed everything. One arrow fired from a city wall. One arrow that found its mark. One arrow that would lead to the deaths of 750,000 people. And the man who ordered this massacre? He wasn't even there to see it happen. He was hundreds of miles away, conquering other cities, building an empire that would become the largest contiguous land empire in human history. But wait until you hear why he did it, because the truth behind this story is even crazier than the numbers suggest. This wasn't about gold. It wasn't about territory. It wasn't even about power. This was about something much more primal, something that goes back to the very core of human nature. And to understand why an entire city had to die, you first need to understand the man who ordered it. This is Genghis Khan, one of the most feared conquerors in history. And by the time he's in his 50s, he's built an empire that stretches from sunrise to sunset. We're talking about 12 million square miles. That's bigger than the entire continent of Africa. Think about that for a second. One man controlling more land than an entire continent. And boy, did he enjoy crushing anyone who stood in his way. At his peak, Genghis Khan controlled territory containing over 100 million people. That's about 25% of the world's population at the time. His armies had killed so many people that forests grew back and carbon emissions dropped enough to actually cool the planet's temperature. Scientists estimate he killed 40 million people. That's 10% of the entire world's population. In modern terms, that would be like killing 800 million people today. But how does a boy abandoned on the frozen steppes of Mongolia end up ordering the complete annihilation of an entire city? How does someone go from eating field mice to survive, to commanding the most feared army in human history? And what could possibly drive someone to command that every living thing in a city of 750,000 be executed, down to the last infant and animal? Little did anyone know that this massacre wasn't about conquest or strategic advantage. This was about something that dated back to when Genghis Khan was just a boy named Temujin, learning the harsh lessons of the Mongolian steppes. This was about family. This was about a code of loyalty so absolute that breaking it meant not just death, but the complete erasure of everything you ever were, or ever would be. Welcome to the insane true story of Genghis Khan's blood revenge. You see, Genghis Khan wasn't born Genghis Khan. He was born Temujin around 1162 in the harsh grasslands of Mongolia, a place where the weak died and only the strong survived. And when I say harsh, I mean temperatures that could drop to minus 40 degrees Celsius, where one bad winter could wipe out your entire tribe, where children learned to ride before they could walk, and where showing weakness meant death. His father, Yesugei, was a minor tribal chief who was poisoned by rivals when Temujin was just 9 years old. But here's the crucial part. It wasn't just the death that shaped young Temujin. It was what happened next. After his father's death, his family was cast out by their clan, left to die on the steppes with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Imagine being 9 years old, watching your mother Holin desperately digging for roots in the frozen ground. Watching your younger siblings cry from hunger. Knowing that your own tribe, people who had sworn loyalty to your father, had abandoned you to die. It was an early lesson for young Temujin that in this world, loyalty meant everything, and betrayal meant death. But Temujin had something different about him. Where others saw desperate survival, he saw opportunity. Where others saw chaos, he saw patterns. He would later reflect on these times and say they taught him that strength wasn't just physical. It was about bonds, about creating loyalty so fierce that men would die for you without hesitation. By the time he was a teenager, something happened that would define his entire approach to loyalty and betrayal. His older half-brother, Bektar, had been stealing food from the family, taking more than his share while the younger children starved. In most families, this would lead to an argument. In Temujin's world, it led to an arrow through Bektar's heart. Temujin and his younger brother Kasar hunted Bektar down like an animal and killed him. Cold, maybe. But in Temujin's mind, his brother had betrayed the family unit, had put his own needs above the survival of the group, and betrayal had only one punishment. When his mother found out, she was horrified, calling him a destroyer, a wolf. But Temujin was unmoved. The family survived because the traitor was eliminated. It was that simple. The truth is, these early experiences were creating something in Temujin, not just a warrior, but a man who understood that fear and love, when properly balanced, could unite the most fractious people. He began gathering followers, not through noble birthright, he had none, but through a simple promise. Absolute loyalty would be met with absolute protection and absolute reward. Betray that bond and face absolute destruction. Not just you, but everything connected to you. Your family, your animals, your legacy, everything would be erased as if you never existed. By his 20s, Temujin was already showing the strategic brilliance that would later terrify the world. But here's what's really interesting. He didn't just defeat his enemies, he absorbed them. When he conquered a tribe, he'd execute the leaders who had resisted. But the warriors and their families? They became Mongols. They became family. This was revolutionary in tribal warfare. Usually, defeated tribes were enslaved or scattered. Temujin incorporated them, gave them equal status, equal opportunity. A shepherd could become a general if he proved loyal and capable. Birth meant nothing. Loyalty meant everything. But Temujin saw an opportunity here that nobody else had recognized. The Mongol tribe's greatest weakness was that they spent more time fighting each other than outside enemies. Decades of blood feuds, revenge killings, and tribal raids had kept them weak and divided. Using these new connections, he began implementing something unprecedented, a legal code called the Yasei. It forbade stealing from other Mongols, required helping travelers in distress, and most importantly, it made betrayal punishable by death. Not just any death, complete annihilation. Your entire bloodline would be ended. In many ways, it was such an incredibly simple innovation, but it was the absolute enforcement that made it revolutionary. By 1206, at around age 44, after decades of warfare, alliance building, and systematic elimination of rivals, Temujin was proclaimed Genghis Khan, universal ruler of all Mongols. Picture this moment. Hundreds of thousands of warriors, men who had been killing each other for generations, now united under one man's absolute authority. But ruling Mongolia wasn't enough. Not even close. Genghis Khan had a vision that extended far beyond the steppes. He looked at the soft cities of China, the rich kingdoms of Central Asia, and saw a world waiting to be conquered. He created the most disciplined, mobile army the world had ever seen. Every Mongol soldier had 3 to 4 horses, allowing them to rotate mounts and cover impossible distances, up to 100 miles in a single day. They could shoot arrows with deadly accuracy while riding at full gallop, each warrior capable of loosing 12 arrows per minute. They carried dried meat and dried milk, meaning they didn't need supply lines. His armies moved faster than news of their coming. Cities would wake up surrounded, with no idea how an army had crossed hundreds of miles of desert or mountain without being detected. But here's the genius part. Genghis Khan incorporated Chinese siege engineers, Muslim mathematicians, and European craftsmen into his forces. He didn't care about race or religion. Competence and loyalty were all that mattered. By 12th of 19, Genghis Khan controlled everything from Mongolia to the borders of the powerful Khwarazmian Empire in Persia. We're talking about an empire that stretched across modern-day Iran, Afghanistan, and parts of Pakistan. One of the richest and most powerful Muslim empires of its time. Now, what's really interesting, though, is that Genghis Khan initially didn't want war with Khwarazm. He sent a trade caravan of 450 merchants with a message to Shah Muhammad II. The message was simple. I am master of the lands of the rising sun, while you rule those of the setting sun. Let us conclude a firm treaty of friendship and peace. These weren't spies or soldiers. They were genuine merchants carrying gold, silver, silk, and other treasures for trade. But here's where everything goes catastrophically wrong. The governor of Otrar, a border city, was a man named Inalchuk. He looked at this caravan and saw not diplomatic opportunity, but personal gain. He accused the merchants of being spies and had them all executed, all 450 of them, and seized their goods worth millions in today's money. When Genghis Khan sent 3 ambassadors to demand justice, the Shah made the worst decision of his life. He killed the lead ambassador and sent the other 2 back with their beards shaved. In Mongol culture, this was worse than death. It was the ultimate insult. What the Shah didn't realize was that he'd just signed the death warrant for millions of his people. Genghis Khan spent months preparing his response. He mobilized between 100,000 and 200,000 warriors. The exact number is debated by historians, but what's not debated is that this was the most organized, disciplined military force the medieval world had ever seen. But here's the crucial detail that would matter later. Among his generals was Tokchar, known as the Arrow. One of his most brilliant commanders, and more importantly, his son-in-law, married to one of Genghis Khan's daughters. Also riding with the army was Tolui, Genghis Khan's youngest and most beloved son, a tactical genius who would later father Munka Khan and Kublai Khan. The Mongols swept through Khwarazm like a biblical plague. Their strategy was simple and terrifying. Cities that surrendered immediately were spared, their populations absorbed into the Mongol Empire. Cities that resisted? Complete annihilation. The psychological warfare was as devastating as the physical. The Mongols would drive refugees from destroyed cities toward the next target, spreading tales of horror that would break morale before the siege even began. The capital, Samarkand, fell in just 5 days, despite having 110,000 defenders. Bukhara, one of Islam's holiest cities, with libraries containing hundreds of thousands of books, was burned to the ground. Genghis Khan himself entered the Grand Mosque, proclaimed himself the punishment of God, and had his horses fed from the Quran stands. The message was clear: your God cannot save you from me. And if you're enjoying this crazy story so far, a quick like on the video really helps me out. But trust me, what happens next is even more insane. In April 1220, the Mongol army reached Nishapur, one of Khwarazm's crown jewels. This wasn't just any city. Nishapur was a center of learning, culture, and commerce, home to scholars, poets, and craftsmen. It was where Omar Khayyam had studied, where some of the Islamic world's greatest minds gathered. The city had a population of around 750,000 people, massive for the medieval period. To put that in perspective, London at the same time had maybe 40,000 people. The city initially surrendered, paying tribute and accepting Mongol governance. For a brief moment, it seemed Nishapur might survive the storm. But here's where fate intervenes in the cruelest way possible. In November 1220, while Genghis Khan was campaigning elsewhere, chasing the Shah across his crumbling empire, the people of Nishapur made a fatal miscalculation. Encouraged by false reports of Mongol defeats and believing the main army was too far away to respond, they rebelled. They killed the Mongol garrison and declared independence. They thought they were seizing an opportunity. They were wrong. Dead wrong. The Mongols sent a force to retake the city, led by Tokchar, one of Genghis Khan's most trusted generals. The siege was fierce. The defenders knew what happened to cities that resisted twice. But during the siege, something happened that would seal Nishapur's fate forever. An arrow, fired from the city walls, one arrow among thousands, found a gap in Tokchar's armor. The general fell from his horse, blood pooling beneath him. Within minutes, Tokchar was dead. But Tokchar wasn't just any general. He was married to one of Genghis Khan's daughters, making him family. And if there was one thing you've learned about Genghis Khan, it's that crimes against his family demanded a response that would echo through history. The problem was, Genghis Khan had shown mercy before, and cities kept rebelling, thinking they could resist and negotiate. Little did the people of Nishapur know, they had just given him the perfect excuse to send a message that would terrify every city from Persia to Poland. When news reached Genghis Khan, witnesses say he didn't rage or scream. He simply gave an order, and that order would result in one of history's most complete acts of annihilation. Now, before I reveal exactly how they carried out this massacre, if you want more dark history stories like this, make sure to subscribe, because what Genghis Khan's daughter did next will genuinely shock you. In April 1221, Genghis Khan's youngest son, Tolui, arrived at Nishapur with his army. But he wasn't alone. With him was Tokchar's widow, Genghis Khan's own daughter, and she had come with specific instructions from her father. Not conquest, not surrender, but complete annihilation. The Mongol princess had asked for the honor of supervising the city's destruction personally. For Genghis Khan's daughter, as she stood before the city where her husband had died, this wasn't war anymore. This was revenge. And Genghis Khan had given her carte blanche to take it. The siege lasted only 4 days. The defenders fought desperately, knowing no mercy would be shown. When the walls finally fell, the Mongol princess gave an order that would horrify historians for centuries. Every living thing in the city must die. Not just the soldiers, not just the men of fighting age, everyone. Men, women, children, babies still nursing at their mothers' breasts, the elderly, the sick, even the dogs and cats. Everything that breathed must die. The Mongols were methodical about it. They separated the population into groups, assigning soldiers specific quotas. Each Mongol soldier was reportedly responsible for killing 400 civilians. They used swords and axes rather than arrows to ensure deaths. Some historians report that, to ensure no one escaped by playing dead, the Mongols returned 3 days later to decapitate all the bodies. They built pyramids of skulls outside the city, separate ones for men, women, and children. When it was over, 750,000 people were dead, in a single day. The city's buildings were demolished stone by stone, its foundations torn up, its underground water channels destroyed, and its fields sown with salt so nothing would grow. Where once stood one of Islam's greatest cities, nothing remained but bones and rubble. The Mongol princess reportedly sat on a throne overlooking the destruction, watching until the last building fell. Only then was her husband's death considered avenged. Ultimately, though, the people who suffered most were the innocent citizens of Nishapur, scholars who had spent their lives preserving knowledge, merchants who had never held a weapon, mothers who died trying to protect children who died anyway. What is clear is that this massacre was an example of how personal vengeance can be magnified by absolute power into something beyond comprehension. The Nishapur Massacre sent a message that echoed across continents. Resist the Mongols once and face defeat. Resist twice and face complete erasure from existence. Cities from Damascus to Kiev would remember Nishapur when the Mongols approached their walls. Many chose immediate surrender rather than risk a similar fate. In a twisted way, the massacre at Nishapur might have saved lives by terrorizing other cities into submission. Reports suggest that toward the end of his life, Genghis Khan had gone from a uniter of tribes seeking to end the chaos of the steppes to something else entirely, a force of nature that recognized no limits to retribution. When asked about the greatest pleasure in life, he reportedly said, "To crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and hear the lamentations of their women." What drove Genghis Khan wasn't just conquest, but a tribal code where loyalty was everything, and betrayal, especially betrayal that touched family, demanded absolute retribution. The massacre at Nishapur remains one of history's starkest reminders that in war, it's rarely the guilty who pay the highest price. It's a reminder of what humans are capable of when personal vengeance meets unlimited power. Even today, archaeologists working in the area find layers of ash and bone from that single day in 1221. Now, whilst the story of Genghis Khan's revenge at Nishapur is pretty horrifying, I still wouldn't call him the most ruthless leader in history. For that, you're going to want to check out the absolutely insane story of Tamerlane, who actually tried to outdo Genghis Khan and built literal towers of human skulls that stood for decades, some containing 90,000 heads each. He makes Genghis Khan look merciful by comparison. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers!